Oh, more like a little bit.
Prepare a little for you.
For some reason, this is charging me slow today.
I wouldn't do it in front of the back.
Okay, Mayor, I just sent him a quick text to let him know that we're,
Okay, that's great. We're ready to roll as soon as we hear from them?
well, I told him we're starting, so.
We're gonna start? Okay. Well, then we will get started.
Well, I was thinking we're to just motivate him to hustle. you
Hustle?
know,
Okay.
so we're going to- It's your call, either way. You can-
Well, we'll have to probably make some introductions anyway, so we'll go ahead and get started, because there might be, I don't know how long this will take, if they have lots of questions or not. So I'm gonna call our town board work session to order for January 14th, 2019, at 5:35 PM. Goal of this work session is to have the town board receive information on topics of town business from the town manager, town attorney, and town staff in order to exchange ideas and opinions regarding these topics. Our item of topic this evening is going to be the pay study presentation by Candy Siderius. And we're gonna, and compensation studio. So I think first order will be maybe to go around and introduce ourselves to our folks that are gonna be presenting this evening.
Hi, David Soslowski, member of the town board representing District 6, which is Water Valley, essentially Water Valley is all District 6.
Ken Bennett, District 3, Town Board.
Paul Rennemeyer, District 4, Town Board.
We met. But I just want to let the board know while we're going around that when we attached the generator to town hall, a much awaited generator.
Oh.
It actually, with the electric switching up, it actually fried a piece of our equipment that we broadcast with. And so IT and our network staff just became aware of that this afternoon when we went to start to record this meeting. So we are broadcasting on YouTube, but we will not be on any Channel 8 affiliate or anything tonight. So I'm gonna let the board know that. You may hear from the public while we're in the broadcast, while we're doing this evening. It's just people put. So we're gonna have the consultant out tomorrow to look at that and hopefully have that ready to go again for the next board meeting.
Okay.
Is it too late to put a message on Channel 8?
I can clarify that, I don't.
Sure. Yeah, it'd be great if we had a message and we said, go to this link for YouTube or something to let people know. Awesome, thank you. All right.
Okay, I'm Barry Wilson, Town Board District 2.
Miles Baker, Town Board, District 1.
Tom Jones, Town Board, District 5.
And we met earlier, but Christy Melendez, mayor. So
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you.
And you're just gonna let them?
Yes,
just- Okay, so, I don't know, Jennifer, if you wanna start, or?
Candy's
Candy's gonna start.
ready to start? so
Okay.
we'll roll. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for introducing yourselves. I had the great pleasure of working with the town of Windsor to update their plan. And I'm here to give you an overview of the project, to describe the steps that I always follow when designing a new or updated pay plan. You have received the methodology report along with this PowerPoint. The methodology report is the narrative. This PowerPoint is going to pretty much cover everything in that narrative, just with some graphics. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll try and answer them or let you know when I'll be answering them later on in the presentation. This project began in late September to review the full-time positions here at the town. One of the things that is important to start with in each project is to review the objectives to achieve. In developing this plan, we didn't have much information about the structure that was in place, but most objectives would certainly encompass that we wanted to see how competitive the town's pay was with the labor market. We wanted to make sure that there was consistency applied here, and to design an updated structure that would certainly be affordable, but also would be something that fits the needs of the town. Now, as I say, I go through these same steps with every organization, but every plan is different because every organization is different. Really, in designing a plan, it is a matter of combining not only the overall town philosophy, but also looking at data as well as pay practices. So we have many different layers and levels. It's a very iterative process, and here we go. So what's listed here are the steps that we walked through. Again, I met with town leadership, I met with department heads throughout this process. I wanted to learn as much as I could about the town so that we would have a plan that is going to be what is a good fit. So we start with the objectives, philosophy, we move through a review of the jobs, the descriptions, we look at survey data. It's a very interactive and collaborative process with everyone, and then finally we start updating the structure, and then here we are talking about getting approval so we can implement and then communicate the plan. I'm going to go through each of these steps in more detail. So this first big picture review is where we're looking at what has been the philosophy of the town. It has been to pay at or above what others in the labor market pay. Now, what is the labor market? It is a group of organizations that are competing with the town of Windsor for people who are qualified for the jobs here. But they vary because you have different labor markets because there's so many different types of positions here. I would say for the most part it's going to be geographic or it's going to be industry-related labor market because it's just really a matter of looking at where do people go when they leave. Do they go to other organizations that are local or do they go across the country? Are they in a career that's going to be very industry-specific? And where is the town hiring individuals from? So that really is what labor market means, and it's a matter of getting an understanding of that, what has been working with the plan, what have been the recruiting pressures, what have been the difficulties finding and hiring qualified talent for the various positions. So that's something that we wanted to look at. How have things been changing? We know that the labor market in Colorado has been very tight. It's been difficult for most organizations across the state to find individuals, and it's been all over from accounting positions to maintenance positions, as well as many others. So that is something that's kept in mind, along with what's listed here is what really is important for the town to have, and not only those people who are able and willing to do the jobs, but also be the right fit for the town. And then we also want to consider this project of the pay plan as it fits in with what I call total compensation. So this model, yes, sir.
Sorry, Katie, just, so, would you mention just a little bit about where we deviated from the town's pay philosophy?
I'm sorry?
Where we deviated from the town's pay philosophy with this study?
I wouldn't say we did deviate.
Well, as far as paying above market,
Oh,
that's not.
no, we didn't say that we were going to go, and we did not go above by any means. It was to
Right.
look at how we were assessing pay with what the market was. So it was
Right.
not intended to pay above by any means, and I'll go into that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure
No,
that was
thank
clear
you.
to the board, yeah.
Yeah. You know, another thing that was interesting as well is that there were a number of recent new hires. So you have a lot of long-term employees, but you have a lot of new employees as well across the different departments. So when we talk about total compensation, we want to be aware of this project that was focused on updating the base pay plan, how it fits in with all the other elements that employers offer in exchange for employees' contributions to the organization. So this is a graphic to give an idea of, you know, if in the middle, the organization has identified its strategy and what it wants to achieve, then around that is what are the things that the employer offers in exchange for the employee's contributions. And this is really something that is important on both sides. It's also known as the value proposition. Certainly base pay is required when compensating employees, but it is what we find in the fixed pay or the paycheck. It does not include overtime or any other additional pay. But then there is the arena of benefits is a pretty large bucket, what employers provide to be competitive. So while it was not part of the project, I did take a cursory look at the benefits that the town offers. Pretty much benefits are divided up into paid time off practices, insurance, retirement, and then what's called also as miscellaneous, such as workplace flexibility in scheduling or tuition reimbursement plans and the like. So I did look at the medical, dental, retirement plans. I also looked at the paid time off in the vacation and holidays. And the town is certainly competitive with what other public sector employers offer. So that, I think, is very important to note, as well as one area that the town might be a little lower in is the service eligibility. So the time required to become vested in the retirement plan, for example, or the time before an employee can join the health plan or the dental plan, were slightly lower than what most other public employers offer. But I didn't have any concerns, and I know that this is an area that the town will be looking at further as well. So that's benefits, but then there's other things as well. There are recognition programs that's acknowledging employees' success or contributions. Work-life, any program that employees can benefit from so that they are successful not only personally to meet the needs at home, for example, as well as professionally. Sometimes an employee assistance program would be an example of this, which the town does offer. Development career opportunities, that's something else that the town does provide, but that's where employees, they come and they see that they have not only a career, but they have a future, or it could be as simple as that they have the opportunity to learn new skills. So these are all important elements. Now, all of us see those differently. Performance is listed here too, and that's something to mention, that most public sector employers now give increases based on performance. It is not based on tenure. It's not based on anything, but the primary is performance. Now, that is a subject in and of itself, of course, but that is something the town of Windsor also does. That's important for employees, though, because most employees start by looking at how am I paid, whereas what is so important to consider here is that any pay plan design starts with looking at the job. So that is the focus that we'll talk about now. So this, after getting a sense of how the plan has been working, what are the desired objectives, then the work really begins with looking at any documentation that is going to give me the information about a job's functions, essential functions and qualifications that are necessary in order to perform that position. Most plans are job-based. They are not based on paying for the individual or paying for literal performance, such as if I were a seamstress and I was making dresses, I would be paid literally on how many dresses I created. Instead, it's all based on the job. So that is where we start. It's also known as market pricing. So the process was to look at all of the job descriptions for the town of Windsor and then to come back, meet with department heads to review those job descriptions, because job descriptions don't always capture everything about a job, and jobs are changing all the time. We had some of that occur during the study as well. Then no job in a survey can match precisely with the jobs in any organization either. So that's what we have here noted as the 70 to 80% rule. That's when I'm looking at a job description blurb in a survey that gives functions and qualifications as a summary. Then I'm reviewing, as well as asking the department heads to say, does this seem to capture most of the job that exists here? And that's the process to then enable us to look at survey data. Okay. The next step then is to talk about a concept that's very important in compensation, known as external equity. And it's something that is pretty common to most organizations. When they say we want to see if we are competitive with how we pay our employees, they look to see what other employers are paying. And that means they have to look at survey data to do that. However, survey data must be good data. And that's why I show you this slide that maybe you chuckled about earlier, maybe you didn't. But survey data is not precise. It is only telling us what other employers say they are paying. We don't know why they're paying what that is. We don't know how long employees have been in the jobs. So we have to be very careful about how we use it. And yet it's a critical part, but it is not the only aspect of designing a plan. So I list here what is important about looking at any survey data, because survey data exists on the internet. One could say that survey data is hearsay, that people talk about it all the time. But what is important is to look at a reliable source that gathers survey data, reviews it, and publishes it according to the methodology shown on this slide. That's going to be including not only the terms, statistics, which is about the only science that we deal with in this pay plan. Really, pay plans are based more on art than they are science. It's important that any survey data that's collected is published within an appropriate amount of time, usually 3 to 6 months. Longer than that, could be old, could be stale. And when I say presentation of data or statistics, that means we want to see the number of organizations that had a match for this job that we're looking at. We want to see how many employee rates are in that job sample. We also want to see percentiles, median, which is the middle rate, the mean, which is the average. Because then, again, we're just trying to review that data to see is there anything to be concerned about. We do want to see job descriptions in the survey. We want to know who's participated in the survey. And then, perhaps most important, do we have a good sample size? Sample size is going to help us identify, is this seen to be really a good market average? And it has been identified that 30 rates in a sample is considered statistically valid. The idea behind that is there will always be those who are paying high or who are presumed to be paying high pay rates, those who pay low. And that's going to be based on a number of different factors that we won't always be privy to. But if we have a large sample size, then we can be pretty sure that we have a market average. Okay?
Can I ask a question?
You bet.
And you might have said this, but I don't know, I just need some further clarification. When you're making all these comparisons, then are you able to compare, like, if the department size? So like if we have a department head who, let's say, is overseeing 5 people, and that same department head in another area, but they are overseeing 25 people, do you get that data and
That's not in the
information?
survey.
So you don't know that information?
Mhm.
Okay.
No.
But we did look, to kind of answer that, Mayor, so when we looked at every job, there may be one where we said, well, this match is a director position, we have a director position, but for whatever reason, looking at the scope, it looked like our director wasn't there. They were kind of in between two. So we may say, well, we'll match it to this position and we'll subtract 10% off of it. So we try to take the data and have a good match. But yeah, we wouldn't know, if it's chief of police, it's gonna be the chief of police for Fort Collins and the chief of police for Fowler. And as long as we have 30 of them, we feel like we're gonna hit that kind of average and know about what that is. But there's, yeah.
Okay.
In the job description information in a survey, and it's hard because you have all these organizations that you want to participate in surveys and to provide that data. So if we have very lengthy descriptions, they likely won't participate. So then we have the other side of that coin. Now, well, we never match title to title. That is an absolute rule. It's important to match on those functions, qualifications, and in many of what Shane was referring to is that if we do have a job that is truly a supervisor, but maybe it's called a director, we're not gonna go to the director, we're gonna look at supervision instead, but it won't necessarily tell us And it could be anecdotal that we know that, and I'm kind of ahead of myself, because in the public employer survey, we know and we can see which organizations match to which job, and then I may know from my experience, or someone else may know from their connections, that this is a large department over in Fal, or that's a small department, or the structure of the organization as such. Does that help? Okay. So the surveys that we did use are listed here. A little bit of explanation about this is that these are just how they were published. Employers Council has been collecting and publishing survey data since the mid-1940s. And this first survey that's listed is called the Benchmark Compensation Survey. It includes jobs that are considered very common, that's why the name benchmark is used. Jobs that you find in most organizations, in most industries, most of us have heard of these jobs. So for example, in the finance department, we had quite a few accounting positions that we matched from the survey. Those organizations that contribute data across the state come from the public sector, private sector, and nonprofit in just this survey. This also included jobs in engineering, human resources. So again, we had all of those organizations that are participating. In parentheses, you see that we looked at those employers that are found in the Denver Boulder as well as Northern Colorado to be representative of the labor market. The second survey noted here is the Public Employer Survey. This is a survey of those jobs that you find just in the public sector. So that's where we have our police positions, for example, back to finance, sales tax technician, water positions, stormwater coordinator, for example, public works, and all of the parks, rec, and culture. To give an idea of the survey participation in public sector, we had about 96 entities that participated. Again, we looked at Denver, Boulder, and Northern Colorado. We had about 440 jobs that were published, and this is going to include about a total of 74,000 pay rates. The benchmark survey is larger, so that's going to be about 200 to 300, about 300 employers that are participating, okay. And about 450 jobs were published. But another survey that we use, because there are IT jobs here at the town, is its own survey of about 80 positions in IT. And that is also a survey where we have both public, private, and nonprofit employers participating with their data. So we were able to find matches for all of the jobs at Town of Windsor in these three surveys. Okay. One of the things then that is important to consider is that survey data does lag. So what we did was to consider the time, the date that the survey data was effective, the collection date. These surveys were published roughly May and June of 2018. We knew the implementation was going to be as of 2019. So then we look at what's called aging the data forward to January of 19. And how I do that is to consider if wages are going up. And the means for looking at that is the measure of the employment cost index, sort of the sister to the consumer price index. It's published by the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics. It comes out every quarter, but it's always 1 month behind. So in the public sector, we looked at to see that wages are increasing by about 2.3% as of the end of third quarter. So we use that factor to move the data forward to January 1st of 2019. And the other reason for that is so that all of the survey data is going to be effective as of the same date, and also to be mindful that market data is still moving, the market is moving. So as I talk about external equity, the next concept that's very important is internal equity. This balances the view of the data. And because the data may come high, it may be low. We know that internal equity is going to balance it because we already have some of this identified in various positions. And some of that comes from reporting relationships already established, comes from career progression. There are certain jobs that have levels, for example, level 1, level 2, level 3. Another one would be operators in water. You have your D, C, B, and finally A operators. So those are examples that are already established within an organization, but sometimes the survey data doesn't necessarily correlate with that. So it's important to review that and also consider that, and this goes back to what was mentioned a minute ago, that in some cases, a job may have scope that is either higher or lower than what we could find in survey data. So we would at least add perhaps a percentage to the data to reflect that higher scope of job duty, or the opposite of reducing it. Some compensable factors are listed here to give you an idea of the process, and it was via verbal discussions because when we first looked at the data, then there are some concerns, and it's always interesting to see because any job is going to have factors such as knowledge. Any job is going to require knowledge. It just depends how much knowledge, how is that knowledge acquired, but also a job will have some decision-making authority. Some jobs have more decision-making authority than others. Another example here is accountability. What happens if someone in a job makes a mistake? How easily could we correct the mistake, assuming that we found the mistake? And what are the residual effects of any error made in a job? Could it be that it is minor? Could it be that it's going to have a long-lasting impact? Is it financial? Is it something that's going to even impact life or death? Is it, impacts also the credibility of the town. So these are some of the things that we reviewed as we looked at this position listing. And so really, again, to give you an idea of these steps, we've looked at the job descriptions, we've matched them to jobs in the surveys, we've pulled the survey data, and then we have a position listing based on the market data. That's the first step to combine both of these concepts of external and internal equity. So we have this ordering of positions by data, and it's very iterative because we may stop at that point and say, did we have the right job match? Do we need to go back and review the job match? Then we go forward and we start looking at, do we have jobs that need to be moved because we have a manager and a direct report in the same grade? We also asked for input of the department heads to see, even internally in their own departments, did we have some jobs that were at one level, such as supervisor level, and yet we were seeing them break apart because of the data as it was presented. So that's an important step to make sure that we have jobs that make sense internally as well as what the survey data tells us. So again, survey data is important, but it is not the be-all, end-all for designing the plan. We also looked at the current structure to see, did we have anything that was telling us that this job should be higher or lower within the structure based on the data that we looked at. So again, we didn't have the history of what the plan had been. We still looked at how, again, to be sure, because again, that's why I want to come through with the iterations, is that it's not something that we just pull and then sign off on. We want to continue to look at it in every different level that we can, and we're still focusing on the job. We haven't begun to look at the employees yet. So once we felt that we had the jobs in the right order, we started looking at finalizing salary grades. Salary grades already exist in the plan. We now have fewer grades in the proposed structures. We continued on with both a non-exempt and an exempt structure, as has been the practice. But a salary grade is just a group of jobs that are together because they have been deemed similar in terms of their skills, efforts, and responsibility, as well as how they're paid out in the market. And all jobs in a salary grade will have a salary range. A range is a means of identifying the value of jobs, what will be paid to anyone in those jobs. So they are limits, and they help to provide cost containment for the plan. The ranges are established by first looking at the market averages for the grade and then developing the midpoint from there, then constructing the minimum and maximum from the market average.
And can you talk about that spread a little bit as far as like lower versus can you go higher?
Sure. So now, theory in compensation, which for me goes back a long time, is that you start, and it's a testing aspect. Typically, those positions that are lower in the structure will have a narrower spread from minimum to maximum. Again, that's based on that midpoint. 35% is a pretty standard range, and for our first range that we developed in the non-exempt plan, that is the case, and that is the range that has the custodians. There are two positions, two different departments that were matched to office janitor. The reason for that is because typically, lower level positions, you have employees coming in, they're either going to move up within the organization or they're going to move out. Sometimes they are higher turnover positions, not always. And then you find that the range width will become a little wider as jobs increase in terms of responsibility, to the point where the job ranges can be 55. The most I'd ever go would be 60% for the very highest level executive. The idea there is that as people in higher level positions, they have more responsibility, they're likely going to stay in the position longer, so that allows them to move through the range. But again, it has to be tested with when we get to looking at the pay rates.
Right, and I also just want to point out to the board, and I think you got it, but just really the methodology is when we take the market average and say that market average is $45,000, that's kind of the center, that's what we call the midpoint of the range.
Yes.
And so she works backwards from that 45, and I'm not even trying to do the math, but let's say starting pay is 37.5 from that, and then she works upwards to the high point. So we get our market average, and so if we say the average position pays $45,000, that's not our starting pay. We're realizing that average pay recognizes that people have been there for a while, there's different organizations, so we step that off, and we start people lower, and then after they've been here a certain number of years, they can maybe work up to the mid-range.
Right. The market average is, again, in theory, where an employee would be paid if they've been in the job and they are competently performing. The range gives employers flexibility to pay employees based on a number of things. Could be you have someone that's coming right out of school and they're joining the organization, but they have no work experience. Well, that would allow an employer to pay lower in the range, maybe, but above the minimum. But then the other thing is that you may find, and we did have one pay rate that was over the maximum. And again, we want to look at why that is. That's not what you necessarily.
Well, one. It was, everybody's looking at me, it was Eric, he's way over. I'm kidding. It was,
No, but there was
Not giving any of it back.
there's a story behind all
We have
of
an opening.
these. But that's the idea of having these ranges, because you've identified that this is how the job would be paid. The next step will be looking at how should employees be paid in the range. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here, because this is a very dynamic process, is that, again, referring to what I said earlier, is that there have been a lot of recruiting pressures, and there have been a lot of new hires here, where if you have a range that is set to low, then you're going to be trying to start people who are brand new to an organization, and they're going to say, I don't want to come work for you because you're paying too low. So then you start to realize that you need to be paying a little higher. But if you've also set your maximum too low, then you're going to have people get to a point where they may say, wait a minute, why am I getting maxed out? I'm no longer going to get an increase. But that's the delicate balance that you have to play with and test with when we get to that point of looking at the pay rates. The other thing that comes up, of course, is that you may have situations, and we did, where some people have been here a long time and for whatever reason should have, could have, but didn't get an increase, and they are paid too low in the range. And so these are all the things that employees think about, talk about all the time. So when you have compression, that's where you have employees who are seeing that they may have been in the job for the same or longer period of time and are performing better or perceive themselves to be performing better, but are getting the same or less pay. And that doesn't bode well for employee relations. So again, we're still moving along in our process to try and look at all of these things. So again, the ranges were also an iterative part of the design because we have to start somewhere and then we continue to play with that. Now, throughout this process as well, going back to the internal equity is, I had said that we wanted to look at and get input from the different department heads, which we did, to identify were jobs in the right place and what were the thoughts of the department heads about where the jobs should be placed. Then we still had to look at the pay rates, which is finally where we go. And this is now the point at which we look at how employees are paid. And so in doing so, it's a matter of not only looking at the grades and the ranges and the structure, also to look at the mechanics of the structure. Do we have a good distance from one grade to the next? So some of this is just the math, and also then looking at how the pay rates fit. One of the first things I do is to get everyone in the plan to see not only their title, their name, but their hire date, and to the best we could to also find date and position. Because quite a few people have been here a long time, but they've moved, they've grown within the organization. From there, then we look at first what is the cost of the pay rates that are below the minimum of the proposed ranges. I've already said there was only one pay rate above the maximum of the range. So in doing so, we had a cost, but then we also talked about that merit increases would be given. So we applied merit increases first. Then we looked to see were any employees still below the minimum of the ranges, see what that cost would be. Then was at this point meeting with the department heads to see what was the story. Obviously, I don't know anyone. So I want to be mindful also of any pay equity issues if we have women, for example, or if I see that, and I have to often double check this too. Do we have people who are paid lower in the range, but they've been here longer? What is the story? Is it a performance problem? Okay. Has someone, perhaps, and we found that some people had the incorrect date in job, because that was our focus, not so much the date with the town, but the date in position. So then, as I mentioned, we were looking at that cost to the minimum. Then we looked at what kind of issues do we have with equity or compression. So we considered a number of scenarios and finally landed on, let's look at 2% per year in the position.
Well, so can you really explain to the board what compression is? I mean, I want to make sure they really understand what compression
Sure.
is.
So compression, again, is, and I was saying a second ago, where you may have someone, here's an example of, in a job that has been here 3 years, and now we see they're below the minimum of this proposed range. Now, if you were to hire someone in that same grade, or even in the same job, you're gonna be hiring them at the minimum going forward, and here's this person that even if you bring them to the minimum, they're at the same rate. That's compression, because this person that's been here 3 years is not paid the same as someone who just started yesterday. So it really boils, and it can happen for a number of reasons, but it's when someone, it's either based on performance or it's time and role where they are paid lower than someone else. And it also could come up when you have people who, whether it's supervised, they're paid more than their supervisors. So you're looking at that comes up a lot in police departments, where you're looking at this progression, and there's so many other factors that come into this as well. What are the requirements of the job? So do you have some supervisors, let's even say it's a supervisor in Public Works, that is still doing the work as opposed to supervise, but isn't getting much more than people that they report? They're going to wonder, why am I doing this job? What's the pay? Now, I'm throwing out these scenarios here, but basically that's it. You have people who are going, and employees see that, but it's also not a good administration of the plan to have compression. So
And it is a real morale killer. I've seen it time and again. People say, you get a raise, but it's like, well, wait, I've been here 6 years and this person got here 6 months ago. And I've been an outstanding performer, and now, they make exactly the same as me. So sometimes you feel like, well, geez, it feels a little bit like no good deed goes unpunished. You both got a raise, but it is a big morale killer, and people get really dissatisfied. So again, that's why it's important to address compression of making sure, and again, our compression scope is basically crediting people for 2% a year up to 10 years, or I guess up to 20%.
Right.
But also that we check and make sure they were satisfactory performers as well. So it is tied to performance. There's no way that somebody who is a below average performer would qualify for that. This is really for people
Right.
who are performing at a high level.
Right. And I would echo what Shane says. It's almost, you hear that saying of it must be in the water. Employees know when there is a compression problem. And some will talk about it and some don't. But they deal with it in other ways. But it's not a good pay practice to ignore that. So we wanted to try and see that. We did have some significant compression problems. And that is a concern, and again, considering the length of time that people had been in the job, reviewing with each department head the performance. We did talk, there were a couple of situations, just a couple, where people weren't necessarily performing, so it wasn't that there was a major concern, but overall, we wanted to equalize all of that. Now, the cost to minimum was lower for the non-exempt. It was about $10,317. That's in the methodology report. It was higher in the exempt, $54,500 to bring to minimum. Now, again, many of these employees were also relatively new hires, so to then look at the next step of providing equity adjustments wasn't going to be quite as large. We also had some fairly new job class in one reclassification that made up that cost. The idea of the equity of the 2% is also, in my view, a fairly conservative adjustment. Pay budgets for giving increases for meeting expectations have been at 3% for a number of years now. They're just starting to nudge up, at least as proposed. The total amount that is noted in the methodology report for both cost to minimum and equity adjustments does not include the town manager. Since that position reports to the board, it wasn't appropriate to put that in here, but wanted to make that comment on that. So any questions or comments about the design of the plan?
You would all be disappointed, wouldn't you?
We would cancel tonight's meeting.
Obviously, yeah, I fell asleep halfway through. I guess one question, and I just don't know because I'm too new. Do we do a cost of living increase adjustment?
No.
So it's all just merit?
It's just merit.
And I think, having talked to Dean, it's like a 1 to 3% merit bucket?
Right, so, the board adopts the 3%, so that's what was in the budget. And then we go through the eval, so, because, not everybody's gonna qualify for that 3%, you qualify for less. So I know we always come in under that, so it doesn't cost the town 3%, but I think, most employees, because if they're performing too low, they're probably gonna be cycled out. I mean, you're not gonna have a long-term low performer. So yeah, I think that, most employees for the town will receive somewhere between 2 and 3% this year.
So the department head gets a bucket?
No,
of 3%?
no, no, it is based each merit, so the entire town has the 3% bucket.
Oh.
And then Eric does his evals, every department head does their evals, and wherever their employees come in, then we basically give a spreadsheet to HR, they develop a spreadsheet and say, okay, here's your 10 employees, these 8, met the 3%, this person hit 2.5, and this person hit 2. So it's not like Eric has a 3% to assign out, the max you can receive is 3%.
I see.
You can't give one person 2 though, and another person 4, an average of 3?
That's right.
That's what we would have done, right?
That's right.
Yeah, you give people 1.
That's not our current design, but I would tell you that I've been kind of a passenger with the current design. I think we're gonna have, like in January, I still wanna have a discussion for our eval process and how we do it going forward. But yeah, currently, it's just 3% is the max you can receive.
Okay. And then I guess, I'm sorry, but Candy, for you, I really focus on the page 16 slide, the slide on the surveys used in particular. So when I had kind of told Shane I was gonna ask some questions, I look at the first one, Colorado Benchmark, which I think what you were saying is primarily non-public entity jobs.
Well, go ahead, I'm
Town-
sorry.
Non-town municipal type jobs.
Well, but they are jobs that are still found in the public sector,
Right.
yes. But it's just not in the public sector survey because private employers have those jobs too.
So you said that survey reflected about 300 employers, and you,
Roughly 350 maybe.
okay. And the parenthetical here says Denver, Boulder, and Northern Colorado data lines. Was the town of, were the cities of Denver and the cities of Boulder in that survey?
They're in all of them.
Right, with
Denver, yes.
cities, and I guess when I look at the Northern Colorado bucket, is Vestas in that bucket, for instance?
That's a good question. I don't think Vestas participated. They have in the past, but I don't think they participated in the benchmark survey.
I guess when I look at this, and I just don't know if there's enough data there. So for instance, if we said, well, can you filter this and on any given survey, kind of do it kind of by number of employers or total budget or population of the town, so that we know we aren't pulling in salary information that really reflects a Fortune 500 company. Because if it does, I assure you, we will not be paying the same as,
Okay,
right? So I don't know if this, it sounds like the survey data was simply taken as a whole, and not scrubbed to remove larger cities, large cities, like Denver, or large companies, like, I don't know, pick whatever Fortune 100 company it is.
well, okay. We didn't go in terms of scrubbing or looking at that, but that's why, and I feel like I'm interrupting you. Was there another question as part of that, or do you want me to hear my thoughts on it?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so, because Shane had mentioned that might be a concern. So, one of the things, start with, is that when we have a survey, and we know that we have the participants in the survey, not always do the participants match to all of those positions that are in the survey. So that's one thing. We want more employers that participate, the better.
Sure.
Again, sample size is what we're looking for. So then we have to consider, in the benchmark and the IT survey, we cannot see, because it's considered private information and confidential. In the public employer survey, we can see who matched to which jobs. So I can see, did Denver have a match to that particular job, or did they have a match here? And even within the public sector, because it varies, some public sector, some cities don't have water, or they only have streets, for example. So we have to be mindful of that. Or we find that they have outsourced many of their services. So we don't know all of that, but I can go look at the public employer and see that. But again, if we have a large sample size, we can still filter out, so to speak, the high and the low pay. And that's what I'm looking for. Now, the other thing is that...
And did you do that then? In the benchmark data, did you remove the high and low?
No,
before you-
no, because if I have a good, see, what I did for all of the survey data is I looked at how many organizations had the match, and then how many pay raise. If I had fewer than 30 pay rates, because the
Okay.
30s, well, I star it to say that's something we should consider. And then if there is a concern, because also the thing when I'm looking at the data is that sometimes you find that Northern Colorado was coming in a lot higher than Denver Boulder with a smaller sample size. So all of that I'm looking at as I'm going through. I could look at population, but that's gonna reduce our sample size.
Sure.
Sometimes I've done that, and then we're gonna find, I even looked up for some positions, we were talking about this earlier, there's a streets technician, that's the title of the job. It's a streets worker, journey level, so very solid, journey level, solid, not an entry, not expert level. Where City of Denver, which is not known, and we can't pick up philosophy or pay strategies in any survey data, but I could go and see that the City of Denver paid lower for their streets technician, they have more, than the City of Longmont. And the City of Longmont paid, so the City of Longmont paid more than Denver, and the Town of Windsor paid more than Longmont. So we have so much going on in these surveys that we have to be careful about that. That again, if we have a large sample size, because again, it could be that the Town of Windsor had the individual pay rate was higher, or the average, I should say, was higher because the person had been here longer.
Mhm.
We don't know that. I know from working with different organizations that some are just trying to meet the market, and what Shane mentioned earlier, we're just trying to look at what the market average with good sample size is paying.
By job title.
Not by, well,
Not by title.
having done the job
Job
matches
function.
based on function and all
Job
that,
function.
yes,
By job.
by job.
So it certainly could be that the average that you have identified is skewed higher if some of your data points are from very large Fortune 100 companies or very large municipalities.
Yeah, well, maybe in the private, but we don't really have Fortune 100 companies in the survey data.
Well, you
From the
said you don't
private
know
sector.
who this.
No, I know who's participated, but I wouldn't necessarily know in the private sector benchmark survey who is matched to which jobs, okay?
Okay.
But I do know that in the public employer survey data. And then also looking at the sample size, because that's the idea of looking at that average that will be going to filter out the really high, the really low. Because we will have smaller organizations, a lot of smaller organizations that are also in that sample, that would have
Right.
theoretically lower rates.
Well, I guess there's no way for us to see, because like you said, you know who completed the survey, but when you're looking at a particular job description, you don't know whose it is, right? I think is what you said.
In the private sector.
In the
In the private sector.
right,
Yes, right, that's what you're asking.
Yeah, and those are ones in opinion.
But again, we are looking for externalities though, David, I don't wanna, it's not like we just take it, we don't just get the data back and say, okay, here's our new pay rate. I mean, you really look for externalities, and if the job hit high or low, that, we're kind of pulling that back a little bit. Well, why are we paying so much more for this position? Oh, well, this person's been here 42 years, and they actually do this extra stuff. Or, why are we paying so low for this position? Oh, well, because this stuff. So we don't just take it at face value. If all we did was write on the survey, I would say, well, you're on to something. But to me, that's just the first step. We just look at that to kind of get our base, and then we do a lot more working of the numbers and making sure we're in market.
Okay.
Well, and too, for Denver too, I tell you that, from what I've seen, they're not necessarily a market center, they're not really.
No, they
They don't-
aren't. Denver isn't, City of Aurora has stated that they want to be someone that pays well above the market. But City of Denver isn't necessarily. So some of this is knowing what other employers have as their philosophy, and what they're paying, but don't know. Again, in the IT, an example that comes to mind is that we won't necessarily know which organizations submitted data for the job, let's just say IT manager, for example. But if I have a large enough sample, and I can also look at percentiles. So if I look at the median and I see the mean and there's more than a 10% difference, I'm looking at that. I'm also looking at, again, all of the next steps, which is, again, that position listing, the hierarchy of jobs. And if I see, oh, here's a job that's coming in really high, now, maybe it was skewed. I'm more concerned at lower sample size. That's when it's gonna be skewed data, because one will throw it off more so. But then when we go in that position listing and we see, here's a job where the data came out really high, that's why we also have to balance it with internal equity to see, does this job fit in line with, you know, the career progression, reporting relationships, our culture, et cetera.
Well, I guess you'd have to ask the two of you who are most familiar with this, if you're comfortable that what we've selected as midpoint is reflective of the size of the town and the number of employees in our budget, right? I mean,
I will say, because I have to do this for a living to get up in front of the board, I feel that this was defensible. I think I asked questions, I was concerned perhaps about this. I also had department heads saying, this job should be paid higher, where I push back and say, I don't think so, or it should be in a higher grade. So it's balancing all of these different things of, was it a good job match? What about the data? Did we have a good sample size? Was it a reliable survey? I do think so. Are we, and then I'm looking at the pay rates, so I'm looking at all this at each step, see if I found, and I can bore you with all the stories, but.
probably not. Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
but there are some things where I found that I'm puzzling, I'm scratching my head saying, why is the individual paid this when the survey match and the data says this, but the person is paid this? Then I have to get more information. It could be that they couldn't find anyone else, so they had to pay more. That's a whole aspect about pay practices, though.
It's related to the mayor.
Sorry?
What?
Plus 20%.
Can you just define what you mean when you use non-exempt versus exempt?
Yes, so those are the terms from the Fair Labor Standards Act that we did talk a little bit about that, by the way, but non-exempt means that the job is eligible for and would be paid overtime after 40 hours worked in a work week, whereas exempt, and so they're paid hourly. And then exempt jobs are those which are exempt of Fair Labor Standards Act requirement to be paid overtime. They must satisfy that. We did have, and so they're paid a salary no matter how many hours they work.
Exempt is salary,
Yes,
basically. Okay.
basically. Mhm. We had one position that had been classified as non-exempt, should have been exempt, and so then it's just how we place the positions in the structures.
Two comments. One, to Dave's point, I'm not certain I can assume that corporations might pay a maintenance person more than public. I don't know if that's a fair assumption or not. Second point is, I really appreciate the detail on this. This is much more detailed and complex than our previous studies. And then Dave, you started to ask a question, I just want to read it, I want to hear it again. Does the results of this and the adjustments leave us as a town of Windsor in a position where we are competitive here in northern Colorado with getting quality employees and keeping quality? And I assume, another assumption, that we maybe can't match what a larger city,
Right.
Fort Collins does. But for all the benefits that you had, the whole picture of why somebody would want to work here, are we in a position with these adjustments to hire and retain good quality people?
Right, well, and so, like she put it without, for one of the first total compensation slides that had
Right.
everything. We are looking at some other things too, you know, we're looking at things like, you know, is there an opportunity to be more flexible with our work schedules? You know, are there people who need to be in their office 40 hours a week from Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, you know, or.
Right, because
we have some
people give up
flexibility.
money sometimes
That's
for
right.
other things.
You know, we're looking at, Candy mentioned the vesting. I mean, right now with our policy is you have to work for the town for a full year before you're able to start getting any retirement. That's, not great,
Eligible.
you know, so we're taking a look at that, is like there, you know, can we trigger that at 6 months, you know, maybe past the probationary period. Same thing with our vacation, I think our starting vacation is a little bit, maybe a little bit on the low end, so we're taking a look at those things. A lot of the other things, when you go around the horn, we have pride committee, so we recognize employees, we do those
Right.
things. We do have, if you have a job related and your department head signs off on it, you can get tuition reimbursement. So we have a lot of those other balances. I think that this is, kind of David's question, I think, yeah, this is fair. I mean, we've worked this a lot. What I communicated to department heads is, I don't think any plan is gonna be perfect, but I think that this plan is, a lot clearer than our last plan was.
Yeah.
We've had a lot more engagement, people understand how we got here, and we really did work the data a lot. I mean, I think iterative is a good word, because we have had a lot of meetings and really tried to make this, both the internal and external equity work. So I'm not gonna say that there's no outliers on here, but I think we've got it pretty tight. And then I think that this is a nice step, you know, again, it was the total compensation, but I think that this would be a good step to making us more competitive in the market. And I don't have any desire to go head to head with Fort Collins or Greeley. I don't wanna make it so easy
Right.
on our big neighbors to take staff from us. So,
So two other questions, the other work-life type of things, total compensation, vacation time, investment. I'm assuming there's a cost of that too.
there is, yeah, there's a cost, there's a cost, anytime when somebody's not here, you're paying them for that.
Somebody
there's
else
a
has
cost.
to pick up the slack, so I don't know how we figure that in, but.
Right, well, I
You're-
think,
you're working on it.
we're gonna work, and I think
You're
we're
working on
working to spec, maybe in the summer for HR and I to come back with, some recommended considerations, per our guidelines as far as what we do with those.
And given the job market in northern Colorado in general, how often do you think we need to do something like this?
Question.
This this survey?
Yeah, I'm hoping like it's 10 years down the road. That's the
I
answer I want.
think prior to this, I have to look to Miles, weren't we doing this
We
every
did it
3
2 years
years?
ago.
I was gonna say every two, and I
Yeah,
think
I
we
was
skipped
here.
one.
I was on the board.
At least every 2 or 3 years, we have been doing it.
Yeah,
I think we may have
we've been doing it
skipped
every
one.
2 years.
Let's wait till the next recession to do another one.
So, Tammy, is there best
That's
practice?
fine.
I've always heard 3 to 5.
I would say about 2. Some of it depends on what's going on economically.
Yeah.
You know, during the recession, there wasn't much happening, but it's been about every 2 years. I know of some organizations that look at it every year, but there's a time and cost that's associated with that.
Yeah.
I believe historically it's been every 2 years for towns.
I did pull up the benchmark survey. They surveyed Colorado, Arizona, Utah, and Wyoming. Colorado was 456 entities, although it included resort and western slope. It sounds like you maybe carved those out.
We didn't look at resort or western slope, right?
Right,
Right,
so
or
you-
southern Colorado.
Denver, northern Colorado, got it. So they show 289 entities. They break it down by industry type. Then government is 20% of the survey, so there's a
When you can look at the overall participation.
Yeah. And then the employment sizes are there, and 1 to 49 is 27%, 50 to 100, 16, 100 to 250, 22%. So the bulk of the responses really come from companies or entities that are between 1 and 250
Right.
employees.
Right.
So it sounds like representative for our purposes. That is my only concern. My gosh, the due diligence that went into this, and the way you've really looked at this in so many ways specific to us is fantastic. I think
Oh,
it's great.
thank you.
My only concern is, but are we benchmarking to the right to start with?
Right, and I thought because when we look at the actual data by job, we can't see what size or whatever, but we do see
Right.
that participation as well, right?
So I appreciate this. I did this in corporate America, and we never really got to see what was going on behind the curtains. So it was always just like, here's the new pay ranges, and
Yeah.
compression was a very common thing, and it was a huge thing around. People talk about how much money they make these days, and so it's not always this big secret. So yeah, I also appreciate the level that we've done here, and you know, at some point I guess we're gonna jump to this paragraph here about how much,
The end.
yeah, how much we budgeted versus how much it would cost to get there.
Right, and so, yeah, I think that's a good lead-in for us, is that, we'd asked the board for allowance, I think it was 4% of total compensation, which was just under $400,000, was
Right.
$394,000, because we didn't know what we were gonna see, we really didn't know where our pay rates came out. With said earlier, the first goal is to get everybody at least at minimum, right? We wanna make sure every employee is at least above, you know, the minimum rate, you know, right there. So we did that, and that wasn't really expensive, you know, I'll tell you, we had a couple employees who've been here for a long time, who aren't even at that minimum yet, just for whatever reasons that their pay has not been reflective of their jobs. So we got them there, and then we thought, okay, how do we deal with compression? And so we ran some different numbers, and honestly, I think the 2%, while she said it's kind of conservative, I think it's still, you know, I think that 20% gives us some latitude to, you know, for our long-term employees, to get them over that minimum mark, and, you know, again, just get a little bit of separation. So if we hired somebody 2 years ago, they're not neck and neck with somebody who's been here for 20 years. Yeah, again, it's come up, I think lately, because the job market gets tighter, and so people can ask for a higher starting pay. You know, if you're going for a job, you can just demand a little bit more because of what the market is. And so we've had issues that were kind of made right before Jen and I started, where people were started higher up the scale, and there's a lot of their coworkers that aren't there. You know, they're actually starting higher than their coworkers who've been here for a few years. So we need to correct that in the organization, because it is a morale issue, and I think that we will lose people, and you know, people feel really unappreciated when you don't really recognize that. So so when we address the compression and the 2% per year up to 20%, we were still able to come in 140,000 under the budget, which I think is great. I think we stopped there. The mayor had asked, we got adopted the budget, do we have to spend it all, or you're not gonna spend it all without telling us, right? I think is your question. No, Your Honor. So I think this plan is fair, and you know, if the board was okay with that, our next steps would be, we'd like to make this effective the first full pay period in February, which starts February 2nd, because you know, we have a lot of communication to do with staff. I think Jen and I want to go department by department, meet with them, answer all the staff questions, make sure the staff understands. I think both the boards, you know, I think, you know, not all boards say, yeah, we want to make sure we treat our people right and pay them well. So go out and communicate that, answer their questions. We also want to get Candy back with the leadership team, make sure that they understand kind of the final result. So that's kind of our next steps. You know, if the board is okay with us moving forward.
So you made the man cry.
I'm sorry?
You made the man cry, because she's not using all the questions.
They're happy tears.
I feel like you would feel a high heel against the shin before you start.
My only concern, again, I think it's fantastic. I think it's a well-structured system, will give us room. I'm only concerned that Eric's gonna ask for $140,000 in his budget.
Oh, I've heard of
Because
that.
he knows it.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it's a
swing
Wibbitt. It's a Wibbitt CD.
So you just need a consensus that we want to move forward with this, because we do have a Kern board work session, and so if we can hurry up and conclude this work session, we could probably get our Kern board done before our regular 7:00 meeting tonight, I'm thinking.
Absolutely.
So I was just gonna finish this, because we are at implementation. We had talked about the design, and as Shane just said, he proposed that February 22nd would be the pay date to implement the new plans.
And so that's a pay period that starts February 2nd.
Right, pay date is February 22nd. And then, one of the most important things, though, of course, is the communication. Comments were made to me from many that the plan had never been well understood, that it hadn't been communicated, they didn't know how it had been designed. I even had questions about how jobs were where they were in the current structure.
Sure.
So we did want to put that down as the next step. And then really to conclude, it's one thing to design the plan, then the implementation and going forward will really be most critical for its success. But I do believe that all in all, we have gone through a process that has been thorough, we've been consistent, we haven't made any changes for any one area or job. We did look at the data. I am confident in telling you that I feel that the methodology used is something that I can defend, that also employees can hear this and feel that And then we really wanted to emphasize that going forward, that it's going to be more transparent, that employees will understand the plan via the communication efforts. That will be not only in meetings, but we also have some handouts that can be given to them, and that it is going to track the overall plan of the town. So, any other questions for me?
Is there the consensus of this board to just adopt this in at our next meeting?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
okay. Well, thank you very much, thank you.
Thank
great,
you.
awesome. So we'll do that. So I don't want to get ahead of the board, but you okay with us setting up meetings with staff and going and talking about this before? That's a.
Absolutely.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask that
Sounded like
question
this
about,
meeting.
because I haven't been through one of these either. What, so let's say you sat down with Eric, since we're all picking on Eric, and Eric said, I don't agree with this still doesn't get X amount of people that I know to the right level or whatever. I mean, is there room for that? Or, I mean, I guess what I'm going at is it you saying, no, Eric, this is what it is.
Well,
and this is what
I think it's at this point because we've asked those questions and we've gone through
I was gonna
it.
say, haven't we gone through an
That's what I'm
exhaustive
just wondering- that's what I'm
process
just
right
asking.
now,
I
going
think we-
through, and if we found those things that didn't align, you went and asked those extra
Right.
questions, or
Okay,
you
that's
went
all
and
I
had
wanted to
extra
know.
information.
If we are gonna get those, I have had that of saying, well, how can you say the average dispatcher makes $25 an hour? I've got a friend in Durango that makes 32. Okay, well, I mean, it's like questions you
Right.
get and you just kind of address them one by one.
I think we have to point back to this lengthy document that we worked on for
Right.
the last 4 months.
Yeah,
And that's why it is the way it is, and that's what we're rolling out.
right?
Well, we're not looking at, we don't see the actual fine details that got to this,
Well-
we're seeing the summary.
Well, and a lot of them even, a lot of the stuff that Kenny does, I mean, it's a little bit proprietary to her, right? Like she has her means and methods
Sure.
and her spreadsheets, and there's a lot of data she goes.
I just
through.
didn't know if we were gonna have there's a certain department, or there's something.
I
that's
don't think
still
there's gonna be a department, because each department head has been, really involved
Running
with
along
this.
with it.
Again, just with the communication, I don't wanna skim over this. When we started this process, and we were in our first meeting, and I asked, like, Terry and Eric, and Dennis, long-term employees, well, why do we have this? Nobody knew. It's really been hasn't been a clear communicated process in the past, so, yeah. Okay, well, good, we'll do that, and then we have.
There's really nothing on future meetings, other than, it just points out what we've got coming is on the
Okay.
future meetings, so is there anything specific you
I just
wanted
wanna
to
mention,
point
I
out?
had, and I'm gonna give the board a written report this week. We had our kickoff meeting with CDOT, the scoping meeting for the 257-392 study. And, so I'll give you the whole update later, but one thing I do wanna point out is CDOT wants to come and present to the board in February, earlier the better. I wanna get them on a work session, so I'm gonna talk to staff about this, tomorrow, but I'm looking about maybe adding them on February 4th and maybe kicking one of those other discussions off to a later date, because I think that the CDOT discussion is so important, the board has talked about it so much that I feel like that's the most pressing thing. So if the board's okay with that, we'll just kind of play with that, because I want to get them on, and between us, I don't want them to go and present to like Greeley or Loveland first. I don't want you to read in the newspaper that it's happening, I'd rather they're in front of this board, because it's really a Windsor study.
Oh, but they announced it at the MPO meeting.
Well, right, but as far as CDOT coming and meeting with each
Right.
elected
Oh, yeah.
official, so I'd rather get them.
I just want you to know it has been made public,
Right.
that they plan to spend that money and do this, they made it in a public, open forum, so.
Right, he mentioned that, yeah, your name came up a lot, Mayor. He's like, well, Mayor Melendez will know, 'cause this and that.
The new
So,
chair.
so if we will just, move up in a timely fashion, we'll call the current board meeting to order in about
One more thing,
5
Mayor,
minutes.
did y'all get my email about postponing?
Yes,
Yeah,
you want
so
actually
meeting
just